Thank you, Chairwoman Maloney, for convening today's hearing about the unprecedented relief provided in the American Rescue Plan. As we approach the 2-year mark since the onset of the pandemic, we have to be candid about its disproportionate impact on the lives of Black, Brown, Indigenous, immigrant, and low-income communities. The American Rescue Plan, put forth by the Biden-Harris administration and passed by Democrats in Congress, was a lifeline for families across the Massachusetts 7th Congressional District. And because we were intentional in centering equity, states had adequate flexibility to prioritize life-saving resources to our hardest hit communities. Cities like Chelsea, Everett, and Randolph in my district were among the most severely impacted communities, and they needed additional relief, regardless of esoteric funding formulas, to support their necessary recovery from the pandemic. That is why I, along with Senators Warren and Markey, repeatedly called on our governor to use this flexibility to ensure equitable distribution of more than $5 billion. Dr. Leachman, how did Congress and the Treasury Department structure the recovery funds to allow state governors to address the inequitable impact of the pandemic?
Thank you for that question. It's very important. So the act itself emphasized that the funds were to be available to address the impact of the pandemic and its negative economic impacts. And the Treasury guidance has been very clear in encouraging states and localities and tribal governments and U.S. territories to spend funds in ways that address the inequities that the pandemic made so apparent. They've been visible for us to see, but the pandemic made them especially apparent. And so what Treasury guidance has made clear and encouraged states and localities and other recipients to do is to focus on those communities that are hardest hit and address the disparities that will help. By addressing those disparities, that's the only way we can really recover. How can the community, if the communities that have been most hard hit aren't recovering because we aren't investing properly in them, how can we really call that an effective recovery?
Thank you, Mr. Leachman. And could you just speak to the reporting aspect of that? So just in terms of, that oversight and that accountability. So we gave that guidance, but what were the guidelines in terms of Treasury's reporting to make sure that in fact the funds were equitably distributed and going to the hardest hit and impacted communities?
Sure. Well, each state recipient and larger cities and counties have to submit an annual performance report that details a number of facts about their spending of their funds, including details about each project and their use of funds at that detailed level. They also have to describe the impact on equity and the community engagement process that they used when determining how to spend the funds, both of which can work together to make sure that the funds are allocated in ways that address community needs, especially in the communities most impacted, and that the recipients are thinking about the longer-term impacts on equity so that we can not repeat the same problems in the future.
Exactly. And in fact, in my district, the Massachusetts 7th, investments with the American Rescue Plan were used, directed towards community health centers who are critical in combating health disparities, affordable housing, free transit, bonus payments to low-income essential workers who risked their lives during the pandemic and showed up for their community, folks like grocery store clerks and bus drivers. Mayor Woodard, how are you and other mayors across the country? I've heard some of your testimony, but if there's more you'd like to unpack, how have you used recovery funds to ensure that people who are disproportionately vulnerable to coronavirus and economic hardship are specifically and uniquely supported? Is there anything you'd like to lift up?
Yeah, sure. Just so a couple of things I'd like to talk about. So one, in terms of the fact that we could use some of our money to support rental assistance here in the city of Tacoma, we had an opportunity to partner with a BIPOC nonprofit to get that money out the door. And because we partnered with them, we were able to allocate over 50% of our funding directly to BIPOC community members for rental assistance. I would say that in other cities, Los Angeles is created a fund called La Repair, and it gave grants to support job creation and organizational support and community intervention on racial healing and justice work, again, focused on our BIPOC community. So I have lots of other examples, but those are just a few additional examples of how we're focused on those who need it the most.